And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba. For the final half-hour segment of the broadcast, I'm talking with my guest, Zen Garcia. We're continuing our study on the Book of Genesis, specifically Creation Week. And we're kind of putting cap on day 4 right now. If you want to learn more, in the previous segment, Zen gave his contact information. You can check out some of his resources that he's got on his YouTube channel for more information on that. Some people were asking during the break, where is the next conference I'm going to be at? If you're interested, I'm going to be at the Flattoberfest in Greenville, South Carolina in a couple weeks on October 20th. That's going to be held at a place called, interestingly enough, the Firmament.
How cool.
Yeah, very cool. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump in. Last week, on your show, Zen, we talked about day 4 and how the sun, moon, and stars were placed in the firmament, not outside and around. They were, the word is barakia. They put the bait in front of the word rakia, which means in. That same thing's going to apply in verse 20, but I'll back up to the beginning of day 5 here, and I'll just read all of day 5. It says, "And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the 5th day." Interesting. Birds coming out of the water and told to multiply in the earth. In the earth. It's very specific there. Any translation that says on the earth or over the earth is inaccurate, because the word there has a bait in front of it. Baharetz or barets. It means in the earth, which only makes sense in an enclosed world cosmological system. Everything's in the earth in that regard. So get some of your thoughts on day 5, and I'll share some things that I have in mind regarding the fowls flying in the open firmament.
Yeah, I'll read from the Targum version of day 5. It says, "And the Lord said, Let the lakes of the waters swarm forth the reptile, the living animal, and the fowl which flieth, whose nest is upon the earth, and let the way of the bird be upon the air of the expanse of the heavens. And the Lord created the great Tanins, the Leviathan and his yokefellow, which are prepared for the day of consolation, and every living animal which creepeth, and which the clear waters had swarmed forth after their kind, the kinds which are clean, and the kinds which are not clean, and every fowl which flieth with wings after their kinds, the clean and the unclean. And the Lord beheld that it was good, and he blessed them, saying, Increase and multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let the fowl multiply upon the earth. And it was evening, and it was morning, day the 5th. So, with the Targum, you have, it seems almost in every verse, there's extra description about the creative process, and then in every other story, further detail as to particular things. But I think what is interesting with regard to even the Genesis 1 story of creation, and then the Genesis 2 story of creation, that you have sort of the same animals being described, but a different order to their creation. And I think that has to do with that there were, both the pre-Adamites and those that were told to multiply, be fruitful, and to fill the earth, and those, like with Adam, that perhaps were involved in occupying paradise.
Very good. What were you reading from there?
That was the Targum version of day 5.
So the Aramaic translation?
Yeah, the Aramaic translation, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Some people may remember the debate that I had with Dr. Robertson Jenis, and he was really hung up on the issue of the birds flying in the firmament, in the open firmament of heaven. And So I addressed it, and this is what I have on the screen here for those watching on YouTube is page 308 of his book, Flat Earth, Flat Wrong. He wrote, first, the Hebrew language, although it didn't have the most comprehensive vocabulary, did indeed have different words for in and inside. As noted by Skiba himself, quote, in is usually denoted by putting the letter bait before the noun. We find this information, for example, in the first phrase of Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, Bereshit, or the phrase in the firmament, Berakia, in which bait begins the word reading right to left in Hebrew. But when Hebrew wants to say inside, this is Robert Zen here, he says, it does not use a bait before the noun. Rather, it uses a different letter, the letter mem. For example, in Genesis 6:14, it says, and cover it inside and out with pitch, from the word mabit. The same occurs in Leviticus 14:41, and he shall curse the inside or cause the inside of the house to be scraped round about. Or 1 Kings 6:15, he lined the walls of the house on the inside. He's got the Hebrew word, the letter mem in front of it, with boards of cedar. 2 Chronicles 3:4, he overlaid it on the inside. Again, Hebrew word, the letter mem in front of it with pure gold. Well, there's a book out there that I would refer people to by Dr. Frank Seekins. It's called Hebrew Word Pictures. How does the Hebrew alphabet reveal prophetic truths? Fantastic book. Goes through each letter and the meanings of the words and stuff like that. And bait, of course, is a letter, but it is also a word that means a house or a dwelling place. And so the letter bait means the same thing as the word bait. And you'll note he talks about when the letter bait is in front of a Hebrew word, the bait is used to mean in, inside, or into. So Dr. Syngenis is wrong. It says related languages that agree with the Hebrew use bait as a letter for bait as a house, or to mean in or inside. There are numerous other, he's got the Akkadian, Ugaritic, Sabian, and several others that follow suit on that. He differentiates the letter bait from the letter mem in this book. Bait meaning in or inside. When added as a prefix, the word bait becomes a Hebrew prefix that means in, into, or inside, whereas the letter mem, when used as a prefix, means from or than. Let's see here. On page 185, he again explains the function of the letter mem as a prefix meaning from. He says the mem is added as a prefix in front of a word. Mem becomes the inseparable or the particle preposition that means from, unto, or than. The letter mem in front of a word is the equivalent of the Hebrew word min or from. Let's see here. Dr. Syngenis, again, I got his thing up on the screen here talking about various references that he says that the letter mem means inside. But to further prove the point, please consider, for example, what the Interlinear Scripture Analyzer has to say. It's a software you can get concerning Genesis 6:14 in confirmation of my claim and in contradiction to Dr. Syngenis. And I want to thank my friend Andy Hoy, who is a trained Hebrew scholar we've talked about here on this broadcast before, for pointing something out to me here. It says, in 3 of the 4 examples that Syngenis uses, the letter mem precedes the word bait, which is the word for house, which is in fact the meaning of the letter bait. In this regard, Hoy says, in some cases, bait is used to refer to interior features such as a housing that is carved into something solid. As I understand it, a house without an interior, e.g. a house filled with concrete, for example, would cease to be a house because there would be no inside left for it. This is why something like the Hebrew word used here could literally be translated as from house. And that's actually a better translation as inside, because bait always referring to something with an interior or that is capable of housing something. And the remaining example of 2 Chronicles 3:4, it likewise literally means from inside. So the examples that Syngenis was using to say, well, see, bait is not the word you use for inside, mem is, he's actually incorrect. That when the letter mem precedes the word, it's saying from inside. So in other words, covering it from the inside out. You know, where the English translations are just saying, you know, he pitched it on the inside. The actual Hebrew is saying from the inside, from the inside. So Genesis 1:20, and God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. If you look at that there, it's al panay, across the face. is what it's actually saying there, across the face. Genesis 18:16, and the men rose up from thence and looked towards Sodom. So the same word is used there, al panei, toward. So in other words, what's going on with the birds? The Greek Septuagint says they are flying upon the earth below the firmament. What is being conveyed here, if you can imagine a circular dome enclosed world where birds may start off in a tree or on the ground and start flying in any direction that they fly. If they start on the ground or anything attached to the ground, they're going to be flying toward the firmament, toward the face of the firmament, toward the open part of the firmament in every direction, because the firmament, as we've discussed in previous shows, is connected to the earth. So that actually only makes sense in the context of an enclosed world cosmology. But for some reason,
Amen.
Dr. Singenis and others can't get past the idea of, see, birds are flying in the firmament. I'm like, dude, you're sitting in a room talking to me. You and I are sitting in a room having this discussion the same way the birds are in the dome flying around. I mean, it's not rocket science, but for some reason, people just can't seem to wrap their mind around it, I guess.
Well, they are in denial about our being in an enclosed world system, or the study of the firmament. Because if they really study and investigate the topic of the firmament and the rakia being a solid structure, it totally conflicts with everything they want to believe and everything they want to filter through the whole NASA Copernican heliocentric model for understanding the world. And so, we know, being in an enclosed system, that it absolutely, even the luminaries were placed inside of the firmament, and that they hold tabernacle, they hold circuit, they have revolution, what we would call orbits, circuits in the firmament, as is revealed in Psalms 19, and that the birds also are in the firmament, because the atmosphere and even what we believe to be outer space where the luminaries are, that is all under the enclosed dome within the firmament. And we see this also confirmed in Enoch. He says, of heaven, and in the world, that they might rule in the face of the sky, and appearing over the earth, which is, the birds flying over the face of the earth, become conductors of the days and the nights, the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the ministers of heaven, which make their circuit with all the chariots of heaven. And so, the stars also, and the sun, the moon, the planets, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, they all hold circuit and move also within the tabernacle of the firmament, and that they are all, enclosed over and held beneath what what John calls the sea of crystal like unto glass.
Yeah, amen. This is one of the reasons why I'm a huge advocate for parallel Bibles and always comparing translations. I grew up in a King James only environment, so I understand the mentality. I completely and totally disagree with it. When you lock yourself into the mentality that this is the only correct translation and that nothing else, matters, even the Hebrew and Greek don't matter. And that's how far the King James only crowd will take it.
Right.
I've seen videos with Ken Hovind actually saying, he goes so far as to say that he would correct the Hebrew and the Greek to the King James. That's just insane talk.
That's crazy. Yeah.
That's just ridiculous. But I mean, you can look at other translations. And the reason I do is, for the most part, other than slightly, changing the verbiage to maybe update it so it's not thee and thou, it's rather, me and you and what have you. Most of the English translations for most verses are pretty comparable, very little differences. But you'll find some cases where the translations are different. And that's why I find value in comparing the English translations. And when I see something vastly different, that prompts me, I'm going to go look at the Hebrew and the Greek.
Yes.
I can see what's going on here.
Absolutely.
And that was the case with this. I mean, interestingly enough, NIV, I'm not a huge fan of the NIV, but right off the bat, the NIV's in the Bible.cc or BibleHub.com has a great parallel Bible feature. So you just look up a verse, like in this case, Genesis 1:20, and it gives you all the English translations. You could just go through and check them all out. But it says, the NIV says, and God said, let the water teem with living creatures and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky.
Nice.
Like, okay, all right. Yeah, but I mean, it's not difficult. But I think it's like you said, people's own preconceived ideas, their own biases that they bring to the text, it carries the cognitive dissonance where they just can't get past it. They can't understand. Right. Like even in the book that I mentioned last week, that our buddy, what's his name, Danny Faulkner. I don't know where I thought I had it here in front of me. Must have brought it downstairs. He gets hung up on some of these things too, like in the firmament. Well, like St. Genesis even points out it in his book. He says that, well, in can mean one of two things. It can mean like the peppermint is in the candy. In other words, it's part of the makeup of it. Or it can mean like you and I are sitting in our room talking. Yes. And, so the challenge is figuring out, okay, what's what? Well, obviously the birds aren't embedded in the firmament.
Right.
They're flying in the open space of the room that is the firmament.
Yes.
But Faulkner keeps in his book saying that, flat earth, he has so many straw man arguments. It's like, if you actually put what we really think down, most of your arguments would go away. You're putting up stuff that we don't believe. Well, I take that back. Maybe some people do believe this. I'm not one of them, but some people believe that where it says the stars are in the firmament, that it's comparable to the peppermint is in the candy, that the stars are embedded in the structure of the firmament. I'm not one that believes that. I believe that they are below the firmament and that they're in circuit, below the firmament, moving about, just like the sun and moon are.
Yeah.
So, you're of the same opinion there. But
absolutely, that's what Scripture says. It describes the 7 tabernacles where the different luminaries hold courses, and that they are led by angels. According to Enoch and other sources. So. Yeah, they have a particular cycle circuit that they follow.
Mm. What's your take on the where it says? Let me put up the scripture up on the screen here. Well, it appears that the waters bring forth both the fish and the birds. At least that's the way it looks like to me.
Yeah, well, I'll share with you a passage. This is from the Cave of Treasures, I believe, and it describes the differentiation just in a different way. It says, on the 5th day of the week, God made from the waters mighty sea monsters, fish, winged fowl, swimming beasts, and the reptiles that are in the seas. He created the winged fowl that are in the waters from the waters, for like fish they lay eggs and swim. Now fish swim in the waters, and winged fowl in the air, but some of the latter in the waters also. Although they say that swimming creatures were made from the waters, or that the other wild beasts and cattle were made from the earth, still they consist of parts of all the other elements. Those, however, that are of the waters have the greater part of their composition made of water, while the greater part of those whose origin is earth consist of earth, but none of them lack the 4 elements. And so this is kind of saying that, the fowl that were created of the waters, those are like, ducks and different ones that spend a lot of time on the water and in the water, and that the other birds are those that are, that fly in the air, are more land-based, perhaps like the predatory, because the Targum also differentiates between the clean and unclean animals, and we see that, the raptors and the predators and the vultures, that they are considered unclean because they consume the carrion. They consume dead and diseased animals, and they're impervious to it. And they mostly spend their time on land. They're not what would be considered water or winged fowl of the water, like ducks and Canadian geese and things. So I see that as the distinction and the differentiation.
That is a beautiful text. I enjoyed reading the Cave of Treasures and the books of Adam and Eve.
Me
really
too.
good stuff. But something you said there, if I heard you correctly, just kind of struck me as interesting. That in a sense, these are both creatures that are swimming.
Yeah.
We think of swimming just in water, but in a sense, the birds are swimming through the air.
Right. Yeah.
Same kind of thing is like, especially when you consider air. Well, it's actually full of water.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we don't really see it unless it gets to the point where it builds up to rain.
Yes.
But
condensation, right?
And this is one of those things that it really helps to explain how things work in enclosed world cosmology on a flat plane, is because there's so much water. And this is secular people who believe in the globe now. They are the ones that said, with regard to the Joshua Nowicki picture, that the atmosphere acts like a lens. Well, why does it act like a lens? Well, because the atmosphere is full of water. If people go online and just do a Google search for how much water is in the air, there's an ocean that we are walking through in the air, and all those microscopic spherical balls of water, a spherical ball of water, put them together, you get a big spherical lens. Well, what type of lens is that? It's a convex lens. It's a magnifying glass. So that it explains why we lose the lower parts of buildings and ships and different things that going out a distance. So you just go out and get a magnifying glass, do some tests, you can see for yourself how that works. So when you consider that the atmosphere is acting like a lens, it explains this phenomena, but it also just now explained to me why the birds and the fish were created the same day. In the same way, because the birds are swimming through the water of the air and the fish are swimming through the water of the sea.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then, again, even because it describes them all being composed of like different elements. And so they have different habitation, but again, they are similar in being that they have wings and some on the waters. And again, even the waters in the air, the condensation, the way all that works. Creation is interesting, and especially when you examine all the different creation accounts, which I wanted to bring up and make mention really quickly before we get to the end of the show. We released a book called The Book of Earth, which is a very fascinating study. This individual who completely believes in heliocentric cosmology just did a study on what the ancients believed about the cosmology, going back to the Babylonian, the Canaanite, the Egyptian, the Syrian, so on and so forth, even ancient indigenous and native peoples. And this individual brings forth, all of these ancient accounts, and reading through them, they absolutely confirm, the individual confirms that they all believed in the enclosed cosmology as we are teaching it, and as was only recently changed, that before the Copernican heliocentric model for understanding world, all the ancients believed in this enclosed system, like even the goddess Nut of Egyptian, that as it describes in Isaiah 40, chapter 22, that the tabernacle or the tent of the enclosed cosmology, that the earth is the foundation, and then the curtain spread above it where the heavens are, that is beneath what is the vaulted dome of the earth, as Amos 9 brings forth, and that it is connected, the vaulted dome connects the earth and the heavens together in this unity that Isaiah describes as being in the shape of a tent or a tabernacle. And so that's an interesting study, and one that people should examine if you are interested in, as well as Cosmos, his study, and his book on Christian topography.
Yeah, he's one that it's kind of obscure. Most people aren't aware of his works. Really, really great stuff. In fact, I was, to your point, I was watching the TV series Vikings, and I think it was in season 1. In the story, a Christian monk was taken captive by the Vikings, and they're having a discussion about their gods around a campfire, and the Norse guys there, the Vikings, are talking about their cosmology, and of course they say the sky is the skull of one of their gods and the ground is the dismembered body of whatever, but they're essentially describing an enclosed world cosmology, the cranium skull of their god being or like the Egyptians saying the sky goddess Nut or whatever, but essentially describing the same thing, and then they say to the Christian guy, because he's kind of scoffing at some of that, and they're like, well, what do you believe? And he just kind of looks away, and they kind of cut to commercial break, like well, we're not gonna go there, but if he was written to describe what the Bible actually says, he would say, well, more or less the same thing. We just don't look at it the same way you guys do.
Right.
But all interesting stuff, man. Another great show. Thank you so much, Zen. We'll pick up where we left off next week on your show. It's 8 Central, I think, on Thursday.
9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern. Yes. Yeah,
okay.
8 Central. Yeah.
9 Eastern, 8 Central. So we'll pick it up on Zen's TFR TFR program next Thursday. So, hey, thank you, Zen. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project. We'll see you back next week. Good night, everybody.
God bless all. Good night.